Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to episode 5. In this week's episode, A.J. and I talk about the vital role that mission plays in a successful revitalization process. Most churches are not new to the idea of mission or having a mission statement, but very few are living on mission. A.J. and I detail 3 critical roles that mission plays in your church and why it is so vital to the revitalization process. To read today's show notes, visit malfersgroup.com/5. That's the number 5. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends in ministry. Now, let's dive in.
Okay, today on the podcast, we're talking about the role of mission in revitalization in your church. Extremely important, something that we as an organization begin with. This is one of the first things that we do. And so glad to be bringing this topic to you today. And Scott, let's just jump right into it.
I'm always surprised, actually, that there are other folks that do this kind of work, and mission can sometimes be something that gets, and I'm not slamming anybody, just to be clear, but that just gets rolled over, kind of glazed over. They talk about it for a minute and move on. And it's more important than that, I think. It deserves, we're spending a couple of episodes early on in our podcast. I'm sure as time goes on, we'll revisit the topic again. It's too important to just blow over it, glaze over it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not just like, by the way, one of those things. This is pretty foundational. We're saying this is absolutely foundational.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really the challenge here, I think. I think one of the reasons why that churches struggle with mission is that they have a mission statement. It's very rare for us to work with a church that doesn't have a mission statement or didn't have one in the past. People have had these really negative, that's not even the right thing to say. They've had neutral experiences with mission, and so they're just apathetic about it. It doesn't feel very important. They're not against it. They just don't see the value in having one because it has no impact on the day-to-day operations of the church. And so
right. I think a lot of churches, they think they're supposed to have one, therefore they do at some point.
Right. They read it in a book somewhere that it would be good. And then that's it.
Right. But it's rare that we see that they've maybe taken it to the next level as being an effective tool in the ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to reframe the conversation about mission a little bit. And so that it does play an active and vital role in the life of your church. And the first thing that it does is determines your direction.
It's just kind of a high level concept. We're not talking yet specifics of a good mission statement, but mission as a concept, it determines your direction.
Most of the declining churches that we see are functionally lost. They're like just wandering sheep in the wilderness. They don't know what they are, or they don't have a why. Are they a social club? Are they a place to learn the Bible? Are they a food pantry? Are they basically just a host facility for a preschool where people happen to gather on a Sunday morning? Declining churches are pulled in a lot of directions. And the reason for this is that they've accumulated commitments over the decades. They've said yes to lots and lots and lots of things. And so
lots of good things. We'll give you that.
Yeah, lots of good things. It's a good thing to have a food pantry. It's a good thing to have, Sunday school. It's a good thing to have. There's lots of good things, and good is oftentimes the enemy of great.
Yes.
So mission recenters you and says, this is the thing. When it's all said and done, if we had no money in the bank and we had no staff and we were just a ragtag group of people, what's the one thing we should care about? It's mission. That's what mission does. It defines your direction. And in a revitalization situation, you have to have that. Otherwise, all of those commitments you've accumulated over the years are going to compete for your attention. And if you don't say, no, that is not the most important thing, then you're never going to be able to say no to the things you said yes to in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, the church, I may be a visual picture here for our podcast listeners. Think of a flat-nosed barge, 50 yards wide, attempting to move through the water compared to the pointed bow of a speedboat. And, you can think of all the other things beyond the mission, the focal point of the church will be in the wake of that boat, though. We're going to gather things up behind it as we're piercing through the water. So it's important that we define a primary function to measure all other functions by.
Yeah, that's it. You have to have something that makes decisions for you, and that's what mission does. It defines your yes and defines your no. It decides for you what's going to stay and what's going to get cut. The biggest lie, and we'll talk about this more in when we get to an episode on discipleship pathway. The lie in revitalization is that I can make minor changes and see major results. And that's not the case. And it all starts with mission, because mission immediately will say, man, we've got to start saying no to X, Y, and Z because it doesn't line up with our mission.
Yes. So next, we're going to kind of get to the point here, if you will. Mission roots us in Christ's command, because we are absolutely specific and prescriptive when it comes to this. There's a lot of things in the church that God gives us, a lot of flexibility with. So should we do the big reveal now?
I don't think they're going to be. I think the people who are listening to this podcast are going to be zero.
Drum roll, please. Christ's command is for us to make and mature disciples. We call it the Great Commission. I hope you're not shocked.
We along with people for generations, we also call it the Great Commission.
We didn't just discover this prior to this morning's podcast.
That, like, here's this thing that we call the Great No.
So we are driving to a specific point here, everybody. We just find this to be absolutely central. If we're not bringing the gospel to our community and to the nations, really then to an endpoint of sharing their faith and continuing this cyclical thing that Christ put before us. If we're not about that first and foremost, we're not about the right things.
Where it's about making and maturing disciples, and it's our great joy to contextualize that command in our place and time. And there's a process to that, and we're going to talk about that actually in our next episode. But the role that mission plays is that it roots us in the one thing that Christ commanded us to do right before he ascended.
Well, the one thing that I love about the Matthew passage is that he says, go make disciples, but then he goes on to say, teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. So the Great Commission is all encompassing of all of the awesome and wonderful things that Christ commanded, including what we know as the Great Commandment. Love God, love others, love God, love people, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
I had contact with a church that was Great Commandment focused, and they did not accept that making disciples was the primary mission of the church. They said the Great Commandment is the primary mission of the church. So what that left them with, and they're actually quite a successful church by the measure of love God, love people. They're a very works-oriented church, very service-oriented church. They're a church that has not grown and has declined, and they do not accept that this primary evangelistic component is what they should be focusing on. Mm-hmm. And and so I think the things that have happened with that church are a result of that.
Yeah.
But the Great Commission includes the Great Commandment. The Great Commission is not to the exclusion of the Great Commandment or to all the other myriad great things that Christ commanded. It's all inclusive of it.
Yeah, and in more maybe conservative, there's a pull when we talk about mission to say, well, we've got to say something about Bible teaching, or we've got to say, like, whatever your pet thing is. And we're calling out these social justice minded churches like they're the ones that are the problem. It doesn't really matter. Whatever your pet thing is, a good mission statement is a blanket statement that covers anything that Christ commanded us to do. But focuses us around the one thing that's most important, which is to make it mature disciples. And so it doesn't really matter what your pet thing is, that pet thing has to play second fiddle to the main thing that Christ called us to.
It will draft in the wake of that boat going through the water.
100%.
Yep.
Okay. Point number 3, that the role that mission plays in revitalization is that it facilitates evaluation and defines success. So, when we first start a conversation with a pastor and I say, hey, how are things going? Usually it goes straight to nickels and noses, right? Like how much money the church is losing or has, or are we making budget, and how many people are showing up on a Sunday. And that's fine. I mean, I get it. They probably assumed that's what I meant by that question. But how much money you have and how many people show up on Sunday is not the measure of success, right?
Right.
When we have a clear mission, it becomes easier to have discussions about did we win, because now success is not driven by attendance, but by life transformation. Making and maturing disciples. And that's really, really important, especially as you get further into a revitalization process. Start having to determine what success means. It all has to ultimately go back to mission.
Yeah. Well, and even we even have an actual really great concrete measurement in the Great Commission even, right, Scott? Baptize. It's right there in the middle of the statement. So, and a lot of churches, they count that, they celebrate it, as they should. So, I mean, if you really want to take it only at face value as your mission statement being something to facilitate evaluation and define success, definitely, if your church has not baptized anybody in quite a long time, that's a red flag.
Yeah. I don't want to suggest that baptizing kids isn't good. Of course it's good. But if you've not baptized an adult in a long time, chances are you're not very evangelistic. Your children's ministry might be killing it at sharing the gospel with the kids, which is a good thing. Don't quit that. But if you've not reached an adult in a long time, that should be a warning flag. I think a lot of churches will go, no, we baptize people, and they'll list all the kids that made decisions in VBS. And let me be clear, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But it's not necessarily a measure that your church is very evangelistic.
Right.
Yeah. So when you sit down and we start evaluating the effectiveness of a ministry or a Bible study or an event, we do this when we get to the discipleship pathway process. The success, then we don't go, well, are people showing up for this thing? That's not the question for us for success. Is this helping us make and mature disciples? And we get more specific in what that means as we get into the process, but it has to start with that Great Commission mission. And it becomes the standard by which everything is judged. To wrap this up, I just want you to imagine for a moment that your church really did just go back to the basics. I mean, you've accumulated, you're continuing to commit to things that you never committed to. Think about that. You are continuing the commitments of pastors long before you. At some point, you have to take ownership for the fact that you're still continuing to say yes to things that maybe you don't need to be saying yes to anymore. So what if you were to focus more on transformation than having a full calendar? What would it look like if you were to have a more impactful ministry? What if you were less busy but more effective? None of that can happen unless you have a clear mission. It's your why. It's your mandate. And this is hard to say, but it needs to be said. The Great Commission is why God has established the church. And churches that stop caring about the Great Commission deserve to close. It's not something that God has called. It's not just something that God has called your church to do. It's the only thing God has called your church to do. And it's critically important.
Absolutely. This is not an easy subject. There's more to it than I think a lot of churches give credence to. So, Scott, thanks for putting together 3 very key and primary components as we take a look at mission and mission statements in the church. We're going to expand on this in a little bit more detail, a different angle on this, and that's actually crafting a mission statement in our next episode. And we thank you for listening. We're looking forward to having you back with us again on the next episode of the Church Revitalization podcast.
Hey, listen, if you found this episode helpful and you think it might serve another pastor, maybe one that you know, maybe one that you don't, what really helps get this in front of them, obviously you can share it with a friend. But if you subscribe and leave a rating, man, it really helps get this in front of other people, because you and I all know that the algorithms, man, you gotta do stuff. And so we appreciate your help in getting the algorithms to work in our favor, put it that way. We appreciate you guys so much. Have a great week.